Continuing Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. We are in Alexander the Great. However, he told them he would keep none of them with him against their will. They might go if they pleased. He should merely enter his protest, that when on his way to make the Macedonians the masters of the world, he was left alone with a few friends and volunteers. This is almost word for word as he wrote in a letter to Antipater, where he adds that when he had thus spoken to them, they all cried out they would go along with him, and whithersoever it was his pleasure to lead them. After succeeding with these, it was no hard matter for him to bring over the multitude, which easily followed to the example of their betters. Now, also, he more and more accommodated himself in his way of living to that of the natives, and tried to bring them also as near as he could to the Macedonian customs, wisely considering that whilst he was engaged in an expedition which would carry him as far from thence, it would be wiser to depend upon the goodwill which might arise from intermixture and association as a means of maintaining tranquillity, than upon force and compulsion. In order to this, he chose out 30,000 boys, whom he put under masters to teach them their Greek tongue and to train them up to arms in the Macedonian discipline. As for his marriage with Roxana, whose youthfulness and beauty had charmed him at a drinking entertainment, where he first happened to see her taking part in a dance, it was indeed a love affair, yet it seemed at the same time to be conducive to the object he had in hand, for it gratified the conquered people to see him choose a wife from among themselves, and it made them feel the most lively affection for him to find that in the only passion which he, the most temperate of men, was overcome by, he yet forbore till he could obtain her in a lawful and honorable way. Noticing also that amongst his chief friends and favorites, Hephaestion most approved all that he did, and complied with and imitated him in his change of habits, while Craterus continued strict in the observation of the customs and fashions of his own country. He made it his practice to employ the first in all transactions with the Persians, and the latter when he had to do so with the Greeks or Macedonians, and in general he showed more affection for Hephaestion and more respect for Craterus, Hephaestion, as he used to say, being Alexander's, and Craterus the king's friend, and so these two friends always bore in secret a grudge to each other, and at times quarreled openly so much that once in India they drew upon one another, and were proceeding in good earnest with their friends on each side to second them, when Alexander rode up and publicly reproved Hephaestion, calling him fool and madman, not to be sensible that without his favor he was nothing. He rebuked Craterus also in private severely, and then, causing them both to come into his presence, he reconciled them, at the same time swearing by Ammon and the rest of the gods that he loved them too above all other men, but if ever he perceived them to fall out again, he'd be sure to put both of them to death, or at least the aggressor, after which they neither ever did or said anything so much as in jest to offend one another. There was scarcely any one who had greater repute among the Macedonians than Philotas, the son of Parmenio, for besides that he was valiant and able to endure any fatigue of war, he was also, next to Alexander himself, the most munificent and the greatest lover of his friends, one of whom, asking him for some money, he commanded his steward to give to him. And when he told him he had not wherewith, "Have you not any plate then," said he, "or any clothes of mine to sell?" But he carried his arrogance and his pride of wealth, and his habits of display and luxury, to a degree of assumption unbecoming a private man, affecting all the loftiness, without succeeding in showing any of the grace or gentleness of true greatness. By this mistaken and spurious majesty he gained so much envy and ill will, that Parmenio would sometimes tell him, "My son, to be not quite so great would be better," for he had long before been complained of and accused to Alexander, particularly when Darius was defeated in Cilicia, and an immense booty was taken at Damascus. Among the rest of the prisoners who were brought into the camp, there was one Antigone of Pydna, a very handsome woman, who fell to Philotas's share. The young man one day in his cups, in the vaunting outspoken soldier's manner, declared to his mistress that all the great actions were performed by him and his father, the glory and benefit of which, he said, together with the title of king, the boy Alexander reaped and enjoyed by their means, she could not hold, but discovered what he had said to one of her acquaintance, and he, as is unusual in such cases, to another, till at last the story came to the ears of Craterus, who brought the woman secretly to the king. When Alexander had heard what she had to say, he commanded her to continue her intrigue with Philotas, and give him an account from time to time of all that should fall from him. To this purpose, he, thus unwittingly caught in a snare to gratify sometimes a fit of anger, sometimes a love of vainglory, let himself utter numerous foolish indiscreet speeches against the king in Antigone's hearing, of which, though Alexander was informed and convinced by strong evidence, yet would take no notice of it at present. Well, sometimes what happened, when you were, before you came to greatness, yeah, other people are involved in the process. Whether it was that he confided in Parmenio's affection and loyalty, or that he apprehended their authority and interest in the army. But about this time, one Limnas, a Macedonian of Calastra, conspired against Alexander's life, and communicated his design to a youth whom he was fond of, named Nicomachus, inviting him to be of the party, but he, not relishing the thing, revealed it to his brother Belinus, who immediately addressed himself to Philotas, requiring him to introduce them both to Alexander, to whom they had something of great moment to impart, which very nearly concerned him, but he, for what reason is uncertain, went not with them, professing that the king was engaged with affairs of more importance. And when they had urged him a second time, and were still slighted by him, they applied themselves to another, by whose means, being admitted into Alexander's presence, they first told about Limnas's conspiracy, and by way let Philotas's negligence appear, who had twice disregarded their application to him. Alexander was greatly incensed, and on finding that Limnas had defended himself and had been killed by the soldier who was sent to seize him, he was still more discomposed, thinking that he had thus lost the means of detecting the plot. As soon as his displeasure against Philotas began to appear, presently all his old enemies showed themselves, and said openly the king was too easily imposed on to imagine that one so inconsiderable as Limnas, a Calastrian, should of his own head undertake such an enterprise, that in all likeliness he was his own head, was but subservient to the design, an instrument that was moved by some greater spring, that those ought to be more strictly examined about the matter whose interest it was so much to conceal it. When they had once gained the king's ear for insinuations of this sort, they went on to show 1,000 grounds of suspicion against Philotas, till at last they prevailed to have him seized and put to the torture, which being done in the presence of the principal officers, Alexander himself, being placed behind some tapestry to understand what passed, where, when he heard in what a miserable tone and with what abject submissions Philotas applied himself to Hephaestion, he broke out. It is said in this manner, "Are you so mean-spirited and effeminate?" Well, always be careful what you say and against people and overstate things and all sorts of stuff. It can result in more than just dishonest speech or offensive speech. Philotas, and yet, can engage in so desperate a design. After his death, he presently sent into Media and put also Parmenio, his father, to death, who had done brave service under Philip, and was the only man of his older friends and counselors who had encouraged Alexander to invade Asia. Of 3 sons whom he had in the army, he had already lost 2, and now was himself put to death with the 3rd. These actions rendered Alexander an object of terror to many of his friends, and chiefly to Antipater, who, to strengthen himself, sent messengers privately to treat for an alliance with the Attalians, who stood in fear of Alexander because they had destroyed the town of the Oeniada, on being informed of which, Alexander had said the children of Oeniada need not revenge their father's quarrel, for he would himself take care to punish the Attalians. Not long after this happened, the deplorable end of Cleitus, which, to those who barely hear the matter, may seem more inhuman than of Philotas, but if we consider this story with its circumstances of time and weigh the cause, we shall find it to have occurred rather through a sort of mischance of the king's, whose anger and over-drinking offered an occasion to the evil genius of Cleitus. The king had a present of Grecian fruit brought him from the seacoast. Pomegranates is the only thing I think this, but maybe there's stuff we don't even commonly have. There's a particular type of cherry, I guess they have, which was so fresh and beautiful that he was surprised at it, and called Cleitus to him to see it, and to give him a share of it. Cleitus was then sacrificing, but he immediately left off and came, followed by 3 sheep. Obviously, he was going to kill 3 more sheep, or whatever he did before that, but on whom the drink offering had been already poured, preparatory to sacrificing them. Alexander, being informed of this, told his diviners, Aristander and Cleomantis, that the Lacedaemonian, and asked them what it meant, on whose assuring him it was an ill omen, he commanded them in all haste to offer sacrifices for Cleitus' safety. Yeah, just finish your ritual and come, perhaps you don't want to say orations for hours, but you want to keep that short sometimes, but just finish your ritual and come as people interrupt your ritual. For as much as 3 days before he himself had seen a strange vision in his sleep of Cleitus, all in mourning, sitting by Parmenio's sons, who were dead. Cleitus, however, stayed not to finish his devotions, but came straight to supper with the king, who sacrificed Castor and Pollux, and when they had drunk pretty hard, some of the company fell singing the verses of the Pranicus, or, as others say, of Pierion, which were made upon these captains who had been lately worsted by the barbarians on purpose to disgrace and turn them to ridicule. They gave offense to the older men who were there, and they upbraided both the author and the singer of the verses, though Alexander and the younger men about